Welcome back, Agriscience. We're going to look today at planting media, which is the stuff that you're going to plant plants in. And then our second video will be plant parts and their functions. So we're going to start with taking a look at plant media because it's obviously important to think about what you want to put your plants in, and we have different examples of types of media around here that we use. We have some food plots that we are growing down at the barn in the pasture, and those food plots are being planted directly into topsoil or into the natural soil. Most of what we use for our raised beds and our plants in the greenhouse are going to be a potting soil, a potting media, and then of course we do have our hydroponic system. Now, the hydroponic system, you're sitting there thinking, well, that's not soil. Well, no, it's not. The hydroponic system has perlite in it, which is a volcanic type of rock. It's that white stuff that kind of looks like styrofoam. And then our aquaponic system is going to have pumice in it, which is a lightweight lava type of rock. And so the soil itself is going to be that top layer of earth, and it's going to contain organic matter most of the time. And you're going to start with the topsoil, and then you get into the subsoil, and then you get into the parent material. So we're looking at natural soils like what we're planting our food plots in down at the barn. The soil itself does make a difference in how the plant is going to be able to grow. But then there are other types of media as well. We do not, for the most part, use sphagnum moss or peat moss around here. These are naturally occurring mosses that are going to grow, and a lot of times people will take these, and you can purchase them at home improvement stores or greenhouses. They're dried out normally, and they're typically used whenever you have to keep something damp. So if you have something you're trying to root or something like that, then these mosses are really good for that. But it's not typically something that we use on a regular basis. You can see right here, this is a picture of harvesting of peat moss. It looks like they're just out there in the middle of a bunch of soil, but it's actually this peat moss has dried, and they're harvesting that. Perlite is going to be that stuff that I was just talking about that we have in our hydroponic system. If you've ever taken a look at potting soil and you see these white chunks that are in it, that's perlite. A lot of people think, oh, that's styrofoam. No, it's not styrofoam. It's actually a volcanic rock that has had air infused into it and kind of blown up, I guess is a good way to say it, so that it's very lightweight and has really good water holding capacity because of those holes that are in it. So it's really good for starting new plants. It's good to put into media mixes because they help to hold water. So the perlite's the white stuff that you often see in a potting soil. Sometimes you will see this kind of shiny looking stuff in potting soil, and it kind of gets on your fingers and it leaves like this little gold colored film. That's vermiculite, and the vermiculite actually comes from mica, which is a rock, and it's a rock that's readily available in western North Carolina, and it's used a lot of times for planting seedlings. It's used for planting cuttings, which are those small parts of a plant that you can use to start a new plant. So a lot of times you see perlite and vermiculite in potting soil mixes. This is the perlite that I was just talking about. Does look like little balls of styrofoam, but it does have a grit to it instead of being soft like styrofoam would be. And then here's your vermiculite, and this is just basically crushed up mica, and so it's going to have a little bit of gold flecks to it. And you can see how the this person's fingers here are covered in those little gold flakes. Sometimes, whenever we're looking at planting media, we don't have everything we need. We don't have exactly the soil the way that we want it. And so sometimes we have to add stuff to it in order to get it the way that we want it, in order to be able to grow the plants the way that we want to grow them. Sometimes we add organic matter. which means, maybe we put some mulch in there. Maybe we take some decomposing leaves and put in there. Maybe we have a compost pile. We put some of the compost in there. This helps to improve the nutrient value of the soil. Now, you can't necessarily get very specific about the nutrients that you're putting in whenever you're putting in a natural material like that, but it does help to improve the nutrient value. You can get very specific on what kind of nutrients you add if you actually add man-made fertilizers versus organic type stuff. You can modify the soil pH, and basically with that, we are looking at how acidic or how alkaline or basic that a soil is. The bottom part of the pH scale, you're looking at from 0 to 6.9 is going to be acidic. And so it's going to be on the bottom end of that pH scale. 7 is going to be neutral. And then anywhere from 7.1 to 14 is going to be alkaline or basic. But you can change those. You can make something more acidic by adding sulfur or aluminum sulfate. You can make something more alkaline by adding lime. And so there are ways to adjust. And anytime you adjust that soil, we are doing what's called amending it. We're putting amendments into the soil. This is a picture of limestone. And so when we're talking about limestone, we are talking about when we're talking about lime that would be put into soil, we're talking about ground up limestone. Fertilizers themselves. When you go and purchase a fertilizer, there's going to be 3 numbers on the fertilizer. It might say 10, 10, 10. It might say 15, 0, 15. And what that is the percentage of the 3 primary nutrients that are going to be in that soil. So if we were looking at a fertilizer that is a 10, 10, 10 fertilizer, which is just a basic general fertilizer, all-purpose fertilizer, then you would have 10% of that fertilizer as nitrogen, 10% would be phosphorus, and 10% would be potassium. The other 70% would be made up of other micronutrients and fillers. Sometimes you have different makeups. Whenever I was in college, I took a floriculture class, and the major fertilizer that we used was 20, 10, 20. And so that would have been 20% nitrogen, 10% phosphorus, 20% potassium. The other 50% would have been fillers and micronutrients. And so it's always in that order in PK. And so those numbers, when you see them on a fertilizer bag, are always the amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in that particular order. Organic fertilizers are typically going to be fertilizers that are made with some sort of an animal product or byproduct. This is what we're doing with our aquaponics system that we have in the greenhouse. We are using the wastewater from catfish in order to be able to grow the plants that we have in our aquaponics system. So whenever we're looking at using animal products or byproducts, that's when we're talking about organic fertilizers. The problem with organic fertilizers is, you don't know exactly what's in there. There is no fertilizer analysis. There's no, 15, 5, 15 on the side of a cow. And so you don't know exactly what you're going to be putting in there. But it does help to add organic matter to the soil and does help to improve the nutrient value. The only issue with these organic fertilizers is they are much more slow to act than the chemical fertilizers, man-made fertilizers. And you don't know exactly what you're putting out there. With the inorganic, the inorganic or the man-made, you know exactly what you're putting out there. And typically they work fairly quickly unless you're looking at something like a slow release fertilizer, which is one that just releases a little bit of stuff at the time. Different types of fertilizer applications. You have broadcasting, which is where you're basically just throwing it out all over the entire surface. Side dressing is where you're going to put it beside the row of plants. This is pretty popular for things like field corn and soybeans, field crops, more like more than say like a lawn or something like that. And then foliar application is where you're actually just spraying the leaves. Normally, this is done whenever you have micronutrient problems. If you have your three primary nutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and then you have your macro and your micronutrients. And so the micronutrients are kind of like something that you really don't need in a very large amount, but from time to time you do need them, and you can just spray those onto the leaves. And a lot of times it'll get what it needs by just that little bit of a foliar application. A lot of times, whenever we're doing broadcasting, it's something like a yard or pasture, and we're going to use one of these types of fertilizer spreaders. These are readily available at Lowe's and Tractor Supply, Home Depot. And then, of course, this one is going to be for a much larger area, and would actually work with the tractor. This is a good picture of side dressing, and a lot of times we do this in field crops or even in gardens. And you've got your row. You can see that your corn is coming up here. Fertilizer makes absolutely no difference on seeds. You have to actually get the plant to germinate before the fertilizer matters. And so you want to make sure that your crop is up, and you can go along there and side dress beside it. And this looks like a little corn crop right here, and somebody's come along beside it and they put some fertilizer. When it rains, that fertilizer is going to begin to dissolve, and those nutrients can be absorbed by those corn plants. Okay, so we're going to stop right here. I'm going to take a little break, and we'll do 2 videos on this. Next time we'll look at the different parts of plants, and that will kind of be finishing up our plant unit. So join me back in a few minutes on the other video, and we'll be looking at plant parts.